Bulls are back in town. They don't care about government shutdowns or the lack of economic numbers. Nothing stops this market. Recessions are illegal. And if you think things can go down, you are just simply wrong. $120,000 Bitcoin. Just casual, like 120,000 ETF inflow, boost market momentum. What's going on with this market?
Of October is where it gets good. But to your point, I think actually 2017, 2021, and now 2025. So, those who calling the end of a 4-year cycle be damned. We've had this explosion right at the beginning of October. So yeah, it's got to be it. Bitcoin seasonality, no other explanation.
October is living up to its legend. While Washington stalls and markets wobble, Bitcoin is charging ahead, proving once again that nothing fuels crypto like a classic October rally. Nathaniel Whittemore, a prominent crypto analyst and host of the Breakdown podcast, and Scott Melker, known as the Wolf of All Streets, both see strong bullish momentum returning to the crypto markets. Bitcoin pushed above $120,000 late Thursday, extending a powerful rally that began in September and shows no signs of slowing as October unfolds. Melker notes that the bulls are back in town, unfazed by government shutdowns, missing economic data, or any macro distractions. He jokes that recessions are illegal, highlighting the unstoppable optimism currently driving the market. Whittemore adds that there's no force more powerful in Bitcoin than the power of October. Historically, the month has triggered some of Bitcoin's strongest rallies, with patterns seen in 2017, 2021, and now 2025. Both analysts point out that despite growing concerns over bubbles or macro instability, markets are displaying willful optimism, while Bitcoin continues to serve as a hedge against government dysfunction, a view even echoed by institutional leaders like Larry Fink. Even the U.S. government shutdown, which has furloughed over 90% of SEC staff, hasn't derailed Bitcoin's momentum. If anything, it underscores how resilient the asset has become, reaffirming October's reputation as Bitcoin's most bullish month. Crypto's biggest moves are happening now. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you're ready when the next breakout takes off.
There is no force more powerful in Bitcoin than the power of October. Simply put, it turns October and this happens. That's just the rule. I don't make the rules.
It literally happens on the first. Like, I don't remember. I keep saying maybe it was 2021, but there was like a $10,000 God candle or something crazy, a multi-$1,000, 10% God candle the minute the clock struck midnight at, in the Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah, you usually actually, if you go back and look at the pattern, it's usually the first couple of weeks give us give us a little scare, and then the second of October is where it gets good. But to your point, I think actually 2017, 2021, and now 2025. So those who calling the end of a 4-year cycle be damned. We've had this explosion right at the beginning of October. So yeah, it's got to be it. Bitcoin seasonality, no other explanation.
There could be no other explanation. So clearly the 4-year cycle is then intact, which means it's all over in like a month or two.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, enjoy it now. No, but it's funny. I think that there's a couple things that are actually going on, and one of them is there is a bit of just sort of broader market. I would kind of characterize the markets right now as sticking their fingers in their ears and saying, na, 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 you can't stop me, as all of the other people try to say, bubble or AI infrastructure boom bubble, or, like there is a real kind of a willful unwillingness to do anything but go up to some extent. And, Bitcoin is a little bit coming along for the ride for that. Now, at the same time, I do think that we're also experiencing kind of one of the things that is unique about Bitcoin, which is, while it has become a full macro asset, sort of high beta to the stock market in many contexts, and certainly more than it's ever been, it also still does have this huge base of ideological holders and buyers for whom this idea of it as a hedge against government weirdness is intact. And by the way, it's not just the crypto weirdos like us who have been sort of spreading that narrative. It's also what Larry Fink talks about in many cases, right? Bitcoin as a hedge against debasement and just sort of government chaos more broadly. He talks about this quite frequently on shows. And so, the shutdown is actually kind of an interesting context for this, where there's some narrative juice on that like hedge against dysfunction side, as well as just whatever the heck the markets are doing, which is just, shaking this off entirely. So those are two completely almost opposite forces, but that both drive number up.
Yeah, I had this moment where I saw the government shutdown, which of course was coming right into October 1st. And then you saw Bitcoin skyrocket sort of after hours going into the day, and said, wow, this is like Silicon Valley Bank. It's like something crazy happened, but then stocks just went up too and everything else went up. So nobody cares about the government shutdown in any market. And so it's obviously not unique to Bitcoin in this case. But it was very interesting that those two things aligned so well. I mean, you would think that if the government was shutting down and we weren't getting economic data, that maybe stocks would take a pause.
Yeah, no, that's not how it works. No, but listen, the other thing that I think is, it's a good reminder that we really were very close to like high happy numbers this entire time. We just get bored, right? Like, it's like, in retrospect, so much of the antipathy.
110 was pretty good.
Yeah,
that's a lot of
and
money
it was really close too. Like, it wasn't to your point, that massive God candle. This was just a casual 3.7% jump up in a day, which is big, but not crazy. And here we are, and we're like, oh, maybe we were whining too much.
Yeah, and in the meantime, of course, we get big targets. Price goes up a little bit, and we start hearing, 2.5 trillion banking giant Citi says Bitcoin will hit 181,000 in 12 months. What was hilarious about this prediction is it came out, I think, yesterday, and it was like 135,000 by the end of the year, 4,500 Ethereum by the end of the year. And I was like, Ethereum's like 43.75. Is their prediction really that this could go up? I think it might have hit 4,500 yesterday, the day of their prediction. So maybe we can take some of these with a slight grain of salt. And of course, 3.6 trillion JP Morgan says Bitcoin's undervalued compared to gold. That's actually a very, I think, reasonable take. Suggests Bitcoin can reach 165,000. Once again, reminding people, this is not Jamie Dimon calling in his personal prediction to Bloomberg to tell you what he thinks of Bitcoin.
Well, the interesting thing is that now we do have the potential for narrative self-fulfilling prophecy to take hold a little bit. There is so much seasonal history now that the combination of this plus all of the research shops weighing in now, like, actually could create some meaningful momentum, especially if you have just a little bit of catalytic action. This is one of the potential negative impacts of the shutdown that we might talk about, is these ETFs potentially getting delayed. But, if we did get the sort of self certification type of approach to ETFs and all of that rush into market, there's a whole bunch of things that could happen that turn these very quickly into self-fulfilling prophecies, not just predictions.
Absolutely. And the next story here is going back to that government shutdown, is that the government shutdown could delay new crypto ETF approval. So obviously there's going to be some secondary effects to an extended government shutdown that are not unique to crypto. This could delay any ETF approval, of course, but we were expecting October to be this massive month for up to 19 or 20 approvals of ETFs. That really just cannot happen while the government is shut down. And we're seeing a lot of projections or predictions that the government shutdown could last upwards of 30, 60, maybe even more days. So time to temper some expectations for what we might see on the legislative and regulatory front for crypto during this time.
Yes, I think that this is the sort of the potentially the most negative set of second order effects for us. Is we were already on pretty tight timelines with a lot of this regulatory stuff. And this could be just enough of a delay to bump it into next year. And of course, next year becomes midterms, and it's just a whole different kettle of fish. So I think that is something to keep an eye on.
Even as Washington grinds to a halt, Bitcoin refuses to blink. Its rally and regulatory hopes now stand as a test of whether the world's most decentralized asset can outpace government paralysis. As the U.S. government shutdown drags on, questions are mounting over how it could impact the crypto sector's long-awaited regulatory progress. Nathaniel Whittemore reveals that while the shutdown poses clear risks to legislative momentum, Bitcoin investors may find relief in the fact that ETF approvals are less vulnerable. Since these decisions fall directly under the SEC's authority, He believes the agency could even use the greenlighting of spot Bitcoin ETFs as a symbolic way to announce it's back open for business. Still, Nathaniel Whittemore warns that it doesn't take months of inaction to derail policy progress. Just a few weeks of delay could disrupt the timeline for critical regulatory decisions. Scott Melker agrees that the shutdown may create a backlog once the government reopens, pushing crypto-related priorities further down the list. However, he highlights a rare positive development: growing collaboration between the SEC and CFTC, who recently held their first joint roundtable in 14 years, signaling a shift toward coordinated regulation. Even so, with much of the SEC staff furloughed, IPOs, ETFs, and new rulemaking have slowed to a crawl. For Bitcoin investors, it's another reminder of how deeply macro events and government dysfunction can influence crypto's next big move. Let's get back to the interview.
Concern in my, I think that with the ETFs, it's less of a concern. I think that because that is, SEC fiat, I think that they are going to race to get that. In fact, I can see them using that as their way of announcing that they're back and open for business again, because it's so within their control. But I think that broadly speaking, this is my concern as well. And I don't think it takes 90 days to screw up that legislative agenda. I think it's, more like 3 weeks than 3 months.
Yeah. I agree, because there's just going to be so many more things that they have to deal with first, and the things they want to deal with get kicked down the road. But meanwhile, at the same time, we have harmonization, a new era of collaboration between the SEC and CFTC. Obviously, one of the biggest complaints that we've had as an industry, and probably many have had in their industries, is that these two regulators should be crossing paths far more often than they do. They very much are in the same circles of regulation, but seem to be completely disjointed and never speak to one another. Atkins really pushing to make that no longer be the case. Also at a time when it should be mentioned that Brian Quintens, who many believed was a shoo-in to be the head of the CFTC, has been dinged. It's not going to happen anymore. He was obviously coming over from A16Z, is very crypto friendly.
Yeah, the CFTC is on a journey, man. So much so that after this, they had to release a bunch of statements about how they weren't just going to fold these two organizations into one another, and they were going to keep them separate. Just to put a little bit of perspective on how disconnected these agencies have been, because it's easy to think that maybe this is sort of a Gary Gensler phenomenon. This is the first joint roundtable in, I think, 14 years between these two organizations, which is actually just kind of mind-blowing that the two major market regulators wouldn't have had context to hold a joint roundtable in a decade and a half together. But look, it's sort of more of the same story we've been talking about before, of the bureaucratic apparatus really wanting to kind of turn a new page, move things forward faster, not have their own processes be the barriers to innovation. We need them to turn back on the staff spigot so they can actually do work, and B, with the CFTC, find even one person who wants to and will get approved to lead the organization, I guess, because right now it's non-functional, basically.
As long as the government isn't shut down, it seems like we're moving in a very positive direction. That's all I will say. Until, of course, Elizabeth Warren becomes president or whatever happens next and completely ruins the entire party for us, because we know that that's the only way the simulation can possibly proceed. The next story: Kraken seeks new funding at $20 billion valuation after $500 million raise. It seems like a lot of speculation as to what's going to happen with the Kraken IPO. Obviously, all this comes in context of a monster IPO season for crypto, with some companies that nobody would have expected to do particularly well at all. But we had Circle, Bullish, eToro, Galaxy Digital, Ecstasy, Ford, huge season of all across the board, extremely successful IPOs, at least at first.
With literally zero insider knowledge or conversation, is that Kraken decided that based on where they are relative to how long it's going to take to IPO, that their best play for this market enthusiasm was not race to IPO, but was take advantage of the private markets, right? Juice the valuation, get a valuation set. They haven't raised money for a bajillion years, since the very, very beginning, early on. And so I think that they basically made an assessment that, I don't know that I would go so far as to say that they've assessed that they have missed the window, although you have to think that that's part of the calculus, is that maybe, that the enthusiasm looks to be dampening a little bit. I think it's more that the way that they can play all of the enthusiasm in the immediate term is private markets, right? And so they did that. I think they closed 500 at 15 or some number, 200 to 300 million at a $15 billion valuation. That was sort of like the secret one. Now they're kind of re-upping again. So look, I think it's a smart strategy. Just, line the coffers, create some dry powder. My guess is that they are proceeding with haste, but not, insane urgency around the IPO. And they're going to make a game time decision around whether it still looks good or not at the time that it comes.
I mean, I think you're absolutely correct. We were talking about Tether's humongous fundraise, obviously, and I think it was Dave Weisberger who said there's an old adage on Wall Street, something to its effect, but if someone's willing to give you money, take it.
Yeah,
so they can go into the private market and get a huge amount of money without taking the risk of, IPOing and not being able to control how successful that is or market conditions. You take the money.
One of the most under-discussed stories in crypto is how much cycle winners and successful companies just set themselves up to do well during the bad parts of the cycle, right? This happens over and over again, where the companies that thrive are not the ones who looked like they were the best or were the top or the most talked about. They were just the ones who had good treasury management, for lack of a better term, or had good strategy, who were able to weather the storm given the intense cyclicality. Now, hopefully, one part of the 4-year cycle that I think everyone would be totally happy to jettison is the 3 years of horrifying bear markets that we have to go through every time. But the winners in crypto tend to be the people who are prepared for those sort of, cyclical downturns and interest downturns and enthusiasm downturns. And so, look, storing up $500 million is a good way to position yourself for long duration, during whatever might come.
Bitcoin's momentum shows no signs of slowing as it cements its position above $120,000, signaling renewed strength across the broader crypto market. Despite political gridlock and regulatory delays, investor confidence is surging, pushing total crypto market capitalization past $4.21 trillion. The combination of sustained ETF demand, a shifting Federal Reserve policy, and October's historical bullish pattern continues to fuel optimism. Rather than reacting to macro uncertainty, Bitcoin is thriving on it, serving as both a growth asset and a hedge against instability. The current rally reflects a maturing market where institutional participation and decentralized conviction are driving a new phase of long-term adoption. Could Bitcoin's unstoppable October rally and surging institutional demand mark the beginning of a new long-term bull cycle? Or is the market setting up for another sharp correction? Crypto moves fast. Drop your thoughts in the comments, share with your network, and subscribe to ride the next wave before it hits.